Welcome back to Native Strength. I'm your host, Hypatia Lee, Cherokee Blessed Woman. Years ago, I studied how to heal people with plants. One of my favorite teachers was Gladys Tantagwidian, whose brother Harold was the last chief of the Mohicans. As you may already know, almost all of our modern medicines, including our so-called wonder drugs, are derived from plants. Before we had pills and shots to take, we had roots and leaves and flowers. As healthcare becomes more expensive, many people are returning to the ways of our ancestor and bypassing the pharmaceutical industry altogether and going straight to the source for their healthcare needs. To make our modern medicines, scientists isolate the parts of the plant that they determine to be the active ingredient and leave behind other components. These parts that science can find no use for may even increase the efficacy or inhibit adverse reactions. There are two medicine stories I want to share with you today. The first is about greed and how disease came to the world. This will explain how important our plants are to our survival. You may have noticed that the more greedy people become and the more crowded our living conditions are, the more diseases we find ourselves suffering from. There was a recent article in the New Yorker magazine outlining how our move as a civilization towards living in cities increased our illnesses. Our greed can cause our illness, just like overindulging in the wrong kinds of foods can lead to diabetes, excess weight, and a host of other problems. This medicine story explains how this all started. The people had gotten into the habit of hunting for sport. They'd forgotten about the importance of using all of the pieces of the animal that they had killed in order to make sure that nothing went to waste and making sure that its spirit was honored. They threw away parts of their kill and only kept what they considered to be the best part or what they happened to need at the time. The animals all saw this and it bothered them greatly. They decided to hold council one night to discuss the matter. One by one, each animal came forward to tell his story. They told how humans had hunted their friends and family and forgotten to give thanks for their sacrifice. They talked about the cruel ways in which the hunters had thrown away parts of the animal that had given their life so that the hunters could survive. They even told about hunters who killed simply for sport and not because they were hungry. Each story was worse than the one before, until finally the animals decided that they would create diseases to bring pain to those who had hurt them so badly. Every species, from the smallest to the largest, invented afflictions to make the humans suffer for what they had done. Some were angrier than others, and so there was everything from minor colds and seasonal allergies to rabies and muscular dystrophy. All night they talked, until the sun started to appear on the horizon. Finally, the animals felt vindicated, and they left to go about their business. The plants, trees, and grasses all heard what the animals had said. They felt very sorry for the humans, and a few nights later, they held council. Together, they decided that they would provide remedies for all of the ailments that the animals had devised. Some diseases were more complicated than others, and so sometimes several plants were needed to combat the travesties invented by the wronged animals. By the morning, all of the diseases that had been dreamed up had been given a cure. Now, you may find it pretty hard to believe that animals would hold a meeting and devise all of the diseases on Earth, or that plants would decide to provide the cures, but it is well known that a large number of our medicines are derived from plants. We humans can't speak directly to the plants as a general rule to find out their secrets, but through the years, with trial and error, we have discovered their powers. That's why, throughout the centuries, people were able to fight diseases and didn't just die out before the invention of modern medicines. We knew which plants had antibiotic properties and which ones would ease our suffering. We had apothecaries that carried a variety of plants and herbs, and wise men and women who knew which plants did what in order to alleviate suffering in their communities. There were many books written about these remedies and formulas. For example, plants in the genus Symphytum, which is commonly known as comfrey or knitbone, can help broken bones to heal quickly. Purple eutrochium, or Joe Pye weed, eases the suffering of gout. Now, this was known throughout the continent. If you rub the juice from the hips of jewel weed or Impatiens capensis on your skin, you can go lay in a patch of poison ivy or poison oak with no after effects. You can also use it after you've come into contact with poison ivy to stop the itching and irritation, and it helps with many other skin irritations too. Now, this is far more effective than anything that you can buy in a drugstore. The inner bark of the white willow tree is used to make aspirin. People all over the world knew how to heal with plants. This is not unique to Native Americans. People collected and sold herbs for remedies for thousands of years before pills and drugs were created, and we survived as a species quite well. One of the most useful plants known to man for cloth, paper, rope, biofuel, and building materials, and many other things, can also help alleviate pain, ease depression, combat PTSD, kill cancer cells, and prevent epileptic seizures. Care to take a guess as to what that plant is? I'll give you a hint. It's one of the most controversial and talked about plants today, and some people in positions of power say that only bad people use it. Cannabis, which is also known as hemp or marijuana, has been found in caves with human remains that are many thousands of years old. As you know, there are other more potent plants like poppy flowers that give us opium. We get many useful drugs from opium, but it can also be used to make heroin. So how we intend to use a plant makes the difference between it being beneficial or harmful. Some of you may be familiar with the first part of this next medicine story. It's about our free will and our intentions. Sometimes we can have the best of intentions, but things may end up going horribly wrong. What we do in the aftermath can mean the difference between life and death, as it does in this medicine story. There was a young man who had reached the age of maturity, and so he was sent out on his first vision quest. It's traditional in Native culture to send young men and women out by themselves to seek a vision that will help them to learn their core personality and to reconnect with the plan that their soul has made for this life. He found a secluded spot at the top of a small hill, not far from his village, and he began his ceremony. He made a medicine wheel by gathering 4 big rocks and placing them in the cardinal directions. Then he took out his shell for burning sage and sweetgrass. He purified himself with the smoke of the sage and invited his ancestors who love him to his spot with the smoke from the sweetgrass. He took out his sacred pipe and purified it in the smoke and joined the pipe to the stem in a sacred manner. He loaded his pipe, honoring all of the beings of the earth, sky, and waters. and put in special pinches of tobacco for the 4 directions, above, below, and within, and then began to smoke his pipe in a sacred way, asking for a vision and guidance so that he could walk the good red road, the path to happiness, health, harmony, humor, and hope that leads to the Great Spirit. By the way, did you know that such prayers were against the law in the United States until 1978, the year that I turned 18? That's right. In a country founded on freedom of religion, this simple ceremony that I have just described to you was forbidden until I graduated from high school. But I digress. He faced the center of his medicine wheel first and thought about how he had been influenced by his experiences all around the wheel of life. Then he faced the outside of his circle and thought about how he would influence the world in all of the different directions of the wheel. For 3 days he prayed for a vision. Finally, he saw a place in the forest near a hill where there was a spring. Pure, clean water came from the ground, and in his vision he saw a time when he was much older. It hadn't rained for a long time, and the small river his people lived by had grown dry. His people were thirsty. But because he had found the spring, they were able to drink all that they needed. Because of this, he was made a leader of the people. Now, this vision pleased him greatly. He wanted to be a good person and to be respected by his tribe. He wanted to make his family proud. After his vision, he made sure to leave the area in better condition than when he had found it. This is the traditional way, to honor Mother Earth and all of her relations by caring for her. Then he headed back to his people. It wasn't very long before he came across a snake in his path. The snake begged him to take him down to the river on his way to his camp. "Oh, no," said the young man. "You will bite me and fill my body with your poison, and I will die." "No, I won't," said the snake. "I would be thankful if you would carry me down the hill. It's such a long way to crawl on my belly over the sharp twigs and rocks. I promise I will not bite you." And so the young man picked up the snake and carried him to the river. As soon as he set him down on the ground, the snake turned around and bit him. "Why did you do that?" cried the young man. "Now I won't be able to help my people and fulfill my vision." The snake only looked back at him and said, "It was in my nature. I couldn't help myself. You knew what I was when you picked me up." Now, many people think that this is a great lesson about taking dangerous drugs or experimenting with risky behavior, and it sure can be. But there's more to it than that. That's one thing I've learned in Native tradition. There's always more to it. It's here that the story takes 2 paths. On one path, the young man feels so foolish and sorry for himself that he lays down and he dies. He's too embarrassed to even think about seeking help because he's been warned to stay away from poisonous snakes all of his life. He feels he deserves to die for his foolishness, and he's frozen with fear. There are many times in life that we make a mistake we know we shouldn't have made. One that we were warned about, but for whatever reason, we do it anyway. There's no one that can say that every decision that they have ever made in the past was a good one. We all have shame and regret. We may be too afraid or embarrassed to seek help, or we may even feel as though we deserve what we got for our actions. Sometimes in life, we can be so distraught or desperate that we feel like we are near death. Some people give up, lay down, and die. Others keep seeking help until they draw their last breath. The other fork in the path begins when this young man swallows his pride, picks himself up, and seeks help. He drinks from the river, and if you remember our other stories, the river is knowledge. He grabs some berries to give his body energy. His fingers feel tingly and numb as he picks them, but he keeps calm, knowing that a racing heart would make things worse. The berries taste strange. Even after drinking some water, there's still a strange taste in his mouth. He knows it's the poison working its way through his body. The young brave begins the walk to his village. His body felt like it was shaking, or maybe it was the ground shaking. Either way, it was getting difficult to walk. It seemed like the day had become very dusty for some reason. His vision was clouded, and he had to struggle to find his way. He ignored the pain and thought only of putting one foot in front of the next as he kept moving forward towards his home. Just when he thought he couldn't take another step, he saw the smoke from the camp through the trees, and he made it just to the edge of the camp circle before he fell. He called out to a couple of the children who were playing nearby. They called to their parents, and soon he was being carried to the lodge of the medicine man. As soon as he entered the lodge, he threw up blood and berries. The medicine man made a poultice that he placed on the bite to help pull out and neutralize the poison. He gave the young man a strong tea from special herbs and roots and leaves. He explained that the young man would experience a small death, but that if his spirit was strong, he would come out the other side wiser and stronger. We experience many small deaths in life. Each one takes us a bit closer to our core. For many days, they burned sage and sweetgrass over him while he lay in the lodge with a high fever. It was all the young man could do to draw in air to his lungs and then push it out. This was exhausting to him. The entire world slowed, and he felt like he was nothing more than a speck of dust observing the fire at the center of the lodge. The entire village prayed over him, but he couldn't hear them. He felt entirely alone. He tried to hold on to hope that eventually he would see another sunrise. The young man had another vision. He saw shadowy figures moving in and out of the light. He couldn't tell if they were animals or humans. The figures became clearer, and he could see that it was his people getting water from the spring. A few scouts from a neighboring tribe came to the camp with gifts. They were also having a rough time during the drought, and they wanted to know if the people could help them find water. The wise brave showed the visitors where the spring was so that their people would not go thirsty. This tribe was very thankful. Years passed, and the brave now had long white braids. The two tribes were now trading regularly and often hunted together. One day, a group of men from the other tribe came to hold council. A vicious tribe from the east had been seen in their territory, and they had heard stories of how these people would steal from others and kill those who tried to protect their homes and land. Because they had shared their water with this tribe so long ago, they wanted to warn their neighbors. Eventually, the tribe from the east did come, and their numbers were many. One tribe alone was no match, but together they were able to drive them away. All of this came from sharing the spring that the man had seen in his first vision. Finally, after many days, the young man began to awaken. When he had regained his strength, all of the people gathered to celebrate his return to health. They didn't berate him for handling a snake. In fact, they didn't even mention it. There was no embarrassment or shame, only concern and compassion. His friends and family were too busy showing their love to say anything mean or cruel. There are two kinds of helpful plants: healing plants, like the ones mentioned before, that help with physical ailments, and teaching plants. Teaching plants help us accelerate on our path towards enlightenment when used correctly. Some examples of teaching plants are peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, and marijuana. Modern psychology is in its infancy. We have many people in the world that are suffering deeply, and to ease their pain, we have antidepressants and other pharmaceuticals. These do not help us to solve our problems, but rather numb us to our pain. Remember, pain is our first teacher. It teaches us to seek comfort because something is wrong. When we numb the pain, instead of finding out what is causing it, we are hurting ourselves even more. Sometimes all of the pain that we have been trying to ignore explodes like a pressure cooker. Teaching plants were used to help people ease the suffering in their mind by identifying the cause of their pain. Some of the plants that we have been taught to avoid at all costs are now proving to be quite beneficial, like cannabis. Cannabis helps many people with post-traumatic stress disorder, pain, anxiety, depression, and grief. Propaganda once told us that cannabis users would be so out of control that they would commit violent acts, try to fly from tall buildings, and fall asleep in sub-zero temperatures in the snow, only to die from hypothermia. None of that is true. While some users may find things unnaturally funny or get the munchies, no one has ever died from smoking or eating too much pot. In fact, cannabis not only helps to alleviate suffering from a variety of conditions, but many people use it just for fun. And when they do, they don't wake up with a hangover the next day, get sick to their stomachs and vomit, forget what they did, become angry and violent, or use so much that they die. All things that can happen when consuming alcohol. Native American traditions, like those found on the Native Strength Path, embrace introspection and emotional enlightenment. Rather than simply treating the symptoms with drugs, we help you to find balance and happiness in your own heart. This keeps you from being at the mercy of others or situations beyond your control, because your happiness comes from within. Cannabis has been used to help children live normal lives, seizure-free, whose doctors had previously advised their parents that nothing could be done and they should simply allow the child to die in peace. These children were having hundreds of seizures a week, and the doctors wanted to put them in a medically induced coma until they died. The children treated with cannabis have gone on to have happy lives, attend school, make friends, and in essence, function as any normal child. Isn't that what we all want for our children? It's also helped countless adults with muscular dystrophy, Parkinson's disease, PTSD, and other conditions to hold jobs, function normally, and lead happy lives. In fact, this plant is so important to the Cherokee people that there are legends of how it was brought here by the Star people, who knew it would be integral to our survival as a species. When pharmaceutical companies want to monopolize our access to remedies so that they can make all the money from our pain and suffering, they often call their competitors dangerous and poisonous. Plants that people have been using for thousands and thousands of years with great success and little to no side effects are suddenly deemed experimental and unconventional. Remember this: if the pharmaceutical industry provides a cure rather than a pill to simply manage the condition, they will be losing money. It is in their financial interest to keep you dependent on their drugs for the rest of your life, not to cure your condition. Now, to be clear, there are many diseases that pharmaceuticals can cure, but it is worth noting that if they were to cure diabetes, high blood pressure, depression, and all of the other conditions that millions of people take drugs for every day, these companies would lose billions of dollars annually. The cost of healthcare keeps going up, and fewer people can afford it. The poor and the elderly often cut their pills in half. Those who are without coverage go without treatment, and those who desire a remedy that the government says is illegal must suffer. For example, many women are denied therapeutic abortions that they may need for medical reasons, when a pot of strong black and blue cohosh tea mixed with uva ursi usually produces the medically necessary result. We have problems with antibiotic-resistant bacteria when there are so many plants with antibiotic properties that you probably have at least one growing in your yard or in a park near your apartment. You may have thought it was a weed, but remember, a weed is just an unwanted plant, or even a wanted plant growing in a place you didn't want it to. Many of the plants we curse in our yard and lawns are actually quite good for us. For example, coltsfoot or Tussilago farfara is a common broadleaf weed that can be used for asthma, bronchitis, or just to clear mucus out of the lungs when you have a cold. In our society's effort to build things better, stronger, and faster, we sometimes forget just how wise our ancestors were. After all, they not only survived, but thrived for thousands and thousands of years without our modern conveniences. Sometimes we can build a better mousetrap, while other times we abandon the achievements of the past only to rediscover them later and wonder why we ever forgot them in the first place.